If you're in the home labs, you fall into one of three categories. You've either found the hypervisor of your choice, you're either looking for the hypervisor you want to use, or you've been laid before. Luckily, I'm in category 1. I'm a Proxmox user. Now, wait a second, isn't this video about Unraid? Yes. I'm always down to try new things. I'll try anything twice, so when a lot of people suggested I try Unraid as my hypervisor, I went for it. Now, this was 3 weeks ago, and I've been using it on and off since, and I have some thoughts on it. Some good, some not so good. But overall, did Unraid overseed Proxmox as my new hypervisor? Let's find out. So what is Unraid? Unraid is Hypervisor OS, just like all the others, but it's built on Linux, so you get all the cool Linux features and Docker containers and whatnot that you're used to on other Linux-based hypervisors. There are two distinct differences, though, with Unraid that aren't so common on other hypervisors. One being that it runs solely off of a USB stick, and it's kind of convenient and not so convenient at times, but it works. Second is that it's not free for any tier. So a lot of hypervisors have a free tier and then more of a corporate or business level paid tier. Unraid doesn't have any free tier at all. They do have a 30-day trial, which is what I'm on, but the prices are as follows. The prices are based solely off of how many disk drives you want to connect to your system. So it's $60 if you have 6 or less disks, $90 if you have 12, and $130 for unlimited. And you're paying this price per USB stick, so that's per device you want to install Unraid on. So those are the main things that separate Unraid from other hypervisors. Now, obviously, there's a lot more differences, but those are the main ones. So let's jump into Unraid and take a look at some things, and we'll walk through what I like about it and what I don't really like about it. All right, so we're in the dashboard now, and you can see it's a very, very clean interface. There's a lot of good information directly on the dashboard. From here, you can control your actual system, whether you want to shut it down, restart it. Here, it'll show your running Docker containers, your virtual machines, any shares that you have, users, the status of your array and all the disks in it, as well as some hardware information about your system in general. So yeah, I'm not going to cover that a lot. You guys can see it's clean. It's very interactive. You can interact with your VMs, your containers, your users and whatnot. Super intuitive. That's one of the good things that I like about Unraid. It's very clean and very easy to use, and you'll see that as a common theme as I talk about Unraid and all the different features. So let's go over here next into the main tab, which is going to be our array or our storage. Now, Unraid uses the XFS or ButterFS file systems, which are going to differ heavily from something like TrueNAS if you're running a dedicated NAS system over there, which is running ZFS. Now, there are talks, I think, of ZFS coming to Unraid in the future, but as of right now, it's not officially supported. So you're getting XFS or ButterFS, which has its advantages. So with this, you have a single array. Now you're probably thinking, wait, what? I want to be able to divide up, different partitions for different things. How can I do that all in one array? We'll get there. It's pretty cool how it's done. But the cool thing about Unraid and the file systems it uses is that you can take pretty much any drives you have laying around, throw them all at your Unraid server, and it'll combine them into one big array of data. So it's convenient if you have just a bunch of hard drives like I do, literally sitting over there doing nothing, that you can't pair with the ZFS system because it kind of requires matching drives to perform correctly. So super convenient to be able to mismatch drives, throw them in there. If you need more storage, you can stop the array, throw another hard drive in, boot it back up, and you're good to go. The only real stipulation here is that you do have to have a parity drive in your array, which prevents against data loss. And this parity drive has to be equal or larger than the size of the next largest drive in your data pool. So for example, if we look at mine, you can see I'm running 4 2 terabyte hard drives as well as a 256 gigabyte SSD, all in the same array, with my parity drive being one of those 2 terabyte hard drives. Now, I can't use my 256 gigabyte as the parity drive, obviously, because it's not as big as the next biggest drive, which is 2 terabytes. You guys understand numbers. And just like the dashboard, it's super intuitive, super easy to navigate. If you want to go down and stop the array to make some modifications, do that over here. You can perform parity checks. You can spin them down gracefully if you want to do that. Shut down the array. Do whatever you want from there. You can also go over here and view the file systems on the specific disks if you want. So that's super convenient. You can click on there and you can see, oh, what's in the specific disk, and you can see how much space is used. You can see the speed that it's being written to. Now, I think I have to change that. Where do I change that? There's a view for it. There we go. So now I can see the real-time speed that these disks are being read and written to. Now you can add a cache disk to your array if you want to speed it up. And what it does is it takes all the data that it needs to write to your storage, caches it in your cache array, and then does all the parity checks later on down the road. So now you are getting faster speeds, but you are risking your data because while it's waiting to write that parity data, it's being stored in that drive. And if that cache drive fails, then you lose your data. So if you want to sound like an edgy bad boy when you're at the bar, just go up to a girl and tell them you run a cache disk in Unraid. Works every time. So yeah, storage with Unraid is super convenient, but I still like TrueNAS and ZFS. I like the speed better and the ability to customize my pools and dedicated cache for each pool. So tomato, potato. So next let's go into shares, and it's pretty straightforward. All of it's done in SMB. So whatever system you're using, you can connect to these shares. There are some default ones that are here when you initially install Unraid, but you can add your own, obviously. And it's super easy. Go to share, give it a name, any comments. Allocation method, this is super cool. You can click over here if you ever have any questions. I actually had to learn that on stream. It took me like a couple of hours before someone pointed out. Click over there if you want to know more information. So allocation method, there's 3 different ones. There's high water, fill up, and most free. The most common one's high water. You can read through them. I assume you guys can read. I'm not going to go over all of them, but it's pretty cool how you can differentiate how you want data to be stored on each disk for each share. Specify the space. Split level, that's another way of customizing how your data is stored in your array. Remember how I said in your array you have all your disks there, but there is further customization. If you want to specify which specific disks and how you want to store it to the array, here's those settings. So split level, again, you guys can read. You can click over here and it'll discuss everything about it. But essentially it's saying if I store a file, I want all the children file to be in the same disk, or I want the first 2 children to be in the same disk. And you can kind of decide how you want to go from there. But I leave it to automatically because I don't care about children. And even further customization, you can specify exactly which disks you want to include. So if I only want it to go to a specific disk, I can specify that here. On the flip side, if I want it to go to all of them except a specific disk, I can specify that here. And the benefit of that is that if I add disks down the road, these settings will kind of stick. So if it's all, then it'll still use all of them, even if more of them are added. If I've excluded a disk, it'll still exclude that one, even if more are added. You guys get the picture. You're so smart. Users, probably the most basic tab. It's where you create and edit users. It's also where you specify the user's permissions to shares. So for example, in this test user, you can go in, change the password, delete them, give them a nice profile pic. And down here, you can specify what accesses they have to shares. And you can see we have 2 shares that are available. The ISO's one, which comes by default, and it is public. So I obviously have read and write access. And Plex data, that was the one I created for my Plex container. It is private, so by default I have no access. But if I want to change that, it's super easy. Click here and specify which access you want. Apply, boom, done, that easy. Settings, this is where you'll find settings. I'm not going to go over all of them. That would take a billion years. But a couple of cool ones I want to talk about are CPU pinning. This will list all your VMs and containers and other processes, and you can specify exactly which CPU cores or threads you want those services to run on. So for example, if you have 3 major services that you want to separate so that they're not stepping on each other's toes for CPU resources, you can make sure that they're allocated to completely different threads and cores, which is a really, really cool feature that I like about Unraid that I wish they would integrate in some other hypervisors. Another one, let's go over to disk settings. This is where you can specify a whole bunch of nerdy ass shit about your disks. More importantly, the default file system. So XFS, ButterFS, resurfs, and if you want them to be encrypted as well. So yeah, here's where you'll find a bunch of disk settings. Another cool one is UPS settings, and no, this isn't the sexy man that delivers your cat food. This is an uninterruptible power supply, so if you have a UPS connected to your server, which I hope you do, that supports communicating via USB, then you can control a lot of the functionality of that UPS via this GUI here, which is a super cool feature that I haven't gotten to yet, but I've only been testing this. It's not by all my other power supplies, so I'll get there eventually. Here you'll see network services settings where, like I said, you have default SMB sharing, but you can set up NFS as well as FTP. And below that, we have scheduler. And what this is scheduling parity checks on your array to make sure it's healthy, make sure everything's aligned. If there's parity issues, it'll correct them. So you're gonna wanna have that scheduled if you're running this in production or even test, obviously. But I'm running this in super test mode right now, so I kind of disabled it. I'd recommend doing them at least monthly if you're going to do it, so make sure that is set here. All right, so next let's get into plugins, and plugins are essentially what they sound like. They're plugins for your Unraid server that makes interacting with it hopefully better. So two of the most common ones that I've seen are the Community Applications plugin, which you can install here, which gives you access to all the Docker containers and applications created by the community. So you're going to want to go ahead and install that unless you're some super duper introvert. And Fix Common Problems is a cool one that gives you an annoying pop-up whenever this plugin detects common errors on your system and lets you fix them. So yeah, super easy to install, give it the URL, press install, bada bing, bada boom. Docker, this is where all your containers that you install will live. So in here, you can see it's, again, a nice simple UI that you have access to. You can control your Docker containers. You can go in and see information about them, modify them, do whatever you want to them, whatever you want. Obviously, you can go in and add containers, pretty standard information you have here to enter. It's not Docker Compose. I wish they did have a native Docker Compose kind of GUI section similar to how Portainer does. But if you don't like how Unraid handles Docker, you can install your own Docker orchestrator. You can install Rancher, you can install Portainer, you can install whatever you want. So this one will get the job done, but if you want something else, you're free to use it. Next, we'll go into VMs, and it's VMs, virtual machines. Now, it's pretty intuitive to create a VM in Unraid. I would say it's probably the best out of the hypervisors that I've used. So to create a VM, you go in here, you click add, depending on which type of VM you want to add. You go in here and it gives you kind of some default information for that virtual machine, depending on what you pick. So if we go with Ubuntu, you can go in, it'll give it a name, description. Here's where you can specify which threads or cores you want to allocate to that VM. Initial memory, max memory if you allow ballooning on it to go up and down in memory, machine type, BIOS type, a whole bunch of settings here. Now down here in primary disk, now we're going to backtrack a little bit to my array, and you're probably wondering why I have an SSD in my array and not as a cache disk. And that is because I want to run all my VMs specifically on that SSD due to the high IOPS on a VM, currently reading and writing to it. Doing that in a bare metal kind of HDD array definitely slows it down. And yes, I tested it. So it's really cool. Primary vDisk location. Here's where you can specify exactly which disk you want. I would do that to my 256 gigabyte SSD. So here's where I would specify it, how much space I want to allocate to it, a whole bunch of other information. Down here, really cool feature of Unraid in VMs, graphics card. You can specify a graphics card that you want to directly pass through. Super easy. Here you can see it's detecting my GT 1030 that I could easily pass through, but I'm not going to do that right now. Leave it at VNC, network information, any sound card that you want to pass through as well, and click create. Super duper easy. Then you can access it. You just click the icon and you can start, stop it, and remote into it. Oh, of course, I had to do a freaking update. Yeah, but here you go, Windows 10. Cool. All right, apps. One of the major features of why people love Unraid so much, you have a plethora of apps to choose from, and they're super easy to install. They have it categorized. If you want to browse by specific categories, you can browse by all apps. You can search for any apps you want. The only thing I will knock about this is that I would think by default, when you search or when you're just browsing, the officially supported apps would be at the top of the list, but It doesn't seem like that's the case. So the one I have installed for Plex is the official one, and it's kind of 3 rows down. So nitpicking here. You can also sort it by downloads, which is cool. So if you do that, you get more of the official releases at the top. So I wish that was the default behavior, but oh well. So not only is it really easy to browse, search for, and install these apps, the community is super helpful. When I tweeted out that I was interested in trying out Unraid, I got a whole bunch of people telling me to come over to the forums or join Discords, and they'd be willing to help. So that's a welcomed change to anytime you're looking to do something in Linux and some dude who's a keyboard warrior from their mom's basement is threatening you because you don't know how to do some obscure CLI command. So props to the Unraid community. But yeah, for example, if I wanted to install a file browser, search it, boom, the official one, go over here, click install, and just like any Docker container, it's going to ask for some parameters. You can fill those out. Then you literally just click apply, it's going to install, and it'll run in your Docker tab. Last but not least, tools. Now, all this is pretty much the boring diagnostic stuff, but there's one thing I really want to cover over here, and that is system devices. Now, when you're creating a virtual machine and you want to pass through a device or PCI device or what have you, and you click the drop down and you don't see it there, that's because you have to go over here and tell the host system that you want to detach it from the host and allow it to be able to pass through to a virtual machine. Now, if we scroll down, you can see I do have a Wi-Fi network adapter that I have checked, and it is detached from the host, so I can pass that through to any VM that I want. But if you're scrolling through and you see any other devices that you want to attach to a virtual machine, you would simply click them and then go down here and click bind selected to VFIO at boot. Then you're going to have to reboot. It's going to detach it from the host and allow you to pass that through to a virtual machine. So once you do that, you are pretty much set up and ready to go in Unraid. And that is my setup. And I know there's a whole lot more to Unraid. I know there's a whole lot more cool stuff you can do. I know I didn't cover everything, but I don't have the patience or the willpower to make a 5-hour-long video. So overall, I do think Unraid is an amazing hypervisor, especially for beginners. It's super clean. It's super easy to use. It's super intuitive. For that reason, I would strongly recommend it to anybody looking to start a real home server for the first time. Now, I know it's not free, so it's hard to recommend because if you spend 30 days with a trial setting up your entire home server just the way you like it, you're probably not going to want to change to something else, which I guess is a good business move. But if you don't mind the cost, then I would strongly recommend it. But I'd be curious to know, what are you running on your home server? Are you running Unraid? Are you running Proxmox? Are you running TrueNAS? Are you running all of them? Let me know down in the comments. So that's all I have for you today. If you liked the video, please drop a like. If you like content like this, please consider subscribing. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next one.